Welcome to the International Coach Federation Virtual Professional Development Program. I'm very pleased to introduce today's presenter, Robert Holmes, whose program is titled Drive, the Neurology of Coaching Motivation. Robert is the co-founder and CEO of Fraser, Holmes and Associates, now one of Australia's largest coaching companies with work across Australia and internationally. They have trained more than 100 coaches in Australia and employ coaches to work in diverse areas to coach the homeless, long-term unemployed, schools and teachers, private clients, small to medium enterprises, business teams, executives and government. Everyone, I'm sure you'll join me in welcoming Robert Holmes. Over to you, Robert.
Thanks, Fiona. It's a real pleasure to be here this morning, and thanks for joining us on this webinar and making a valuable investment in yourself and in your coaching. I'd like to just make it clear that questions are welcome, and I'll make time and place on the way through. Fiona and I have agreed about a protocol for that, so I'll make a space, and if there are no questions at that point, I'll just keep moving on until the end. I'm going to leave some space at the end for questions too. Obviously today's webinar is about how motivation works from a neurological or a brain perspective, and about how to access the various layers of motivation to help your clients as you coach them to stay motivated. I'll try and make the science as accessible as possible. Obviously, neuroscience is quite complicated, and as you'll find out, there's a lot going on in the head. There's quite a lot that gets left out of our standard motivational models, and unless you've studied psychology at university, it can be quite easy to overlook a lot of the research that's been going on lately. I'm not really sure what motivated you to join in today, perhaps the persuasive powers of the ICF marketing team, or you needed the CCEs. Maybe you're dealing with procrastination yourself, or you have a lack of motivation, a lack of get up and go. There are some people that we work with who underpromise and overdeliver, or who overpromise and underdeliver. Maybe you want to motivate your sales team with the right incentives. And some of you I know have listened to Marvin Oka last month and you wanted to know more. And so I'll give you some more about that as we go along. We're of course running on the assumption that you need a brain to be motivated. So I'm sorry, Homer, we're not going to be able to motivate you. But for all the rest of us who have normally working human brains, today's really going to be helpful to you. One of the reasons that I'm so passionate about motivation is that it really has the power to revolutionize your practice and your client's life and your own life. Motivation is one of these killer applications that affect everything for the positive. I was listening to the Little Atoms podcast the other day, and they were interviewing Maria Konnikova about her book, Mastermind, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes. And in it, she made the observation that motivation is one of those X factors that affect everything else positively. This remains true across all studies, regardless of race, sex, age, or education. Konnikova observes that motivation improves memory, it improves concentration, brain receptivity to new ideas, priming for learning, and performance on any spectrum you'd like to measure. So as I said, it's one of those killer applications that works with everything. And so motivation is well worth studying and well worth you having an investment of time in. I'm going to make some resources available to everybody at the end. So if you can hang in there, I'll give you links to a white paper, the diagrams that I use in this podcast, and a podcast resource. I got to interview Grant Sasalu, who co-wrote a book called M-Braining, which gives you a lot more background into some of the material I'm going to cover here. So I'll give you those at the end. Where do I begin? Perhaps a little bit of biography to fill you in on why neurobiology is even part of my coaching journey. I've had a long and abiding interest in human behaviour. I guess it started with Alan Pease in the late 1980s, if some of you remember him. And so I really got into watching body language at that point. I did psych units in my commerce degree and human behaviour studies with Coopers and Lybrand during my time as a fraud investigator and auditor at Canon, Australia. This followed through to studies in business facilitation. I served with the Business Enterprise Centres of New South Wales and more recently studied micro-expressions and subtle body language with Dr. Paul Ekman. Those of you who are familiar with his work showed up in the TV program Autonomy. I've always been fascinated by situations in which I could highlight a person's behaviour back to them only to be met with denial. They'd use a turn of phrase again and again, but when I pointed it out to them, they'd say it was nothing. I would see highlighted, repeated body language signalling driven by their limbic system, only to be met with disbelief. Oh, that's not what I meant. That's not what it's about. I slowly began to realise that people were often acting in ways that are at odds with their cognitive position. That they often behave in ways that are conflicted with how they perceive their own behaviour. And it drove me nuts because we're talking about intelligent human beings who were denying their own exhibited behaviour. Then after a series of personal physical breakdowns, I had chronic fatigue syndrome, respiratory failure and toxic shock. My research into my own human behaviour really took a turn into some depth. It started a 4-year research project in which I read PhD dissertations and books on the science of human behaviour, and that resulted in me ultimately publishing a book called A Balancing Act, which again produces a lot of the neuroscience that I'm going to be talking about today. When I talk about neuroscience and the science of motivation, we're really talking about head-brain science. Those of you who are familiar with the last 15 years of research will realise that there's also an enteric gut brain and a cardial or heart brain as well. I'm not really going to be delving into the body-brain system, but more the head brain, the cerebral stuff. But keep in mind that the word neuroscience really covers all of that. So this field delves into at least 6 different areas, if you like. It started with neurophysiology. So what are the neurons doing? What are the electrical impulses happening? What's motor coordination about? We added to this the study of neurochemistry, so neurotransmitters, addictions, how the chemistry in the body worked. It progressed into a study of the nervous system, mainly the autonomic and vagus nervous systems. Along came affective neuroscience, so we were really digging into studying emotions, neuropeptides, how they affected people at a cellular level. Along came cognitive neuroscience, which is really studying perception, consciousness, psychology. And then last to the party has been behavioural neuroscience, which is the study of choice and social interaction and economics, oddly enough. So you can see there's a lot there, right? But let's just keep it simple. We're going to be talking about why motivated people do what they do, and more specifically, how do we as coaches help people who lack motivation? So let's get to it. Motivation has been studied a lot in the last 30 years, and you can imagine it's been looked at from every imaginable angle. As I mentioned before, it really started with physiology, basically with zoologists and biologists watching animals. If you think about mice in a maze, or Pavlov's dog salivating when a bell rings, or lizards reacting to electric shocks, or in this case, as you can see, not reacting to anything, basically motivation was studied sort of physiologically in the first instance. Then behavioural scientists and psychologists came along and started watching animal behaviour. So they were watching animals interact in the wild, social priming, picking nits off one another, and also mimicking behaviour. If you think about the movie Gorillas in the Mist, or the social trading experiments of Keith Chen and Laurie Santos with capuchin monkeys, if you're not familiar with them, go look them up. They basically came across the first version of paid mammal prostitution after capuchin monkeys started trading money for indulgences. And then along came neuroscience, which more recently has been looking inside our heads with really expensive equipment like real-time fMRI machines, basically trying to do experiments on people while they're inside those giant, white coffins, playing card games, solving puzzles, looking at disturbing images and so forth. As coaching professionals servicing the needs of our clients, we don't really need to be any of those things. We don't need to be a scientist. We don't need to understand really the depth of neuroscience, but we do have to take what they've learned and go road test it. So the things I'm about to share with you have been road tested in all sorts of fields. So the first place is jails. We've tested the motivational theories in families, in schools, not-for-profits here and overseas in highly impoverished environments, and with businesses of every kind, executives and political leaders. And the funny thing is, people problems are people problems. They happen the world over and they're all the same. So what motivates Kevin Rudd to get out of bed in the morning is the same thing that motivates a prisoner to get out of bed in the morning. Now, let me give you a quick overview of the forms of motivation. There are 7 of them, and they layer themselves up in this way. So at the most biological level, there is pleasure and pain. At the emotional or social level, there is reward and punishment. And then at the cognitive or brain level, there's self-direction, self-improvement, and transcendent purpose, all working together. So before I unpack those 7 things, which is really the guts of what I want to say today, and how to use it in a coaching practice, let me just dial back a minute and look at neurobiology for a second. So in utero, the brain development begins in about week 3 and begins with the hindbrain, followed by the midbrain, and then lastly a very rudimentary forebrain forms in week 7. By week 11, the 3 parts of your brain, or the 3 layers of your brain, have formed within the skull, but they're not fully developed. And then here's how those structures look at 40 weeks. So you can see a baby then has very much the structures that an adult brain has. Neuroscientist Paul MacLean first formulated the triune brain theory to describe these 3 layers in the brain structures. He called them the reptilian, mammalian, and neo-mammalian complexes, but I'd prefer to call them lizard, monkey, and human brain. So you're going to hear me refer to what lizard brain is doing and what monkey brain is doing, and this is the language I use with our clients, so it doesn't need to get any more complicated than that. We'll just talk about how monkey brain's behaving right now. So one of the first problems that we run into is that life is lived from the bottom up. Your life is actually processed from the body to the brainstem, from the brainstem to the limbic system, and from the limbic system up to the prefrontal cortex. Your life is being lived and controlled from a physiological level first, but life is experienced from the top down. You and I having this conversation today think we're in charge, so it's conscious over subconscious over unconscious. And that's a bit of a conflict, because when you stop people in the middle of a conversation and point out their behaviour, their conscious mind has not realised what their body language is portraying about their emotions. And so then the conscious mind delves down into the subconscious and says, what am I doing? And the subconscious is only reflecting how you truly feel on the inside. There are a couple of examples of this just to make it clear for you. When your body is stressed, it will take over and your heart rate will increase without you thinking about it. Or you'll get a headache when you haven't had enough water, or you'll choke up in fear when you do something dangerous. If you've ever ridden a motorbike and taken a corner too fast, you know what that feeling is like. Or when you've got a car out of control, your body takes over. When your reticular activating system, which is based in the back of the lizard brain, senses danger in your environment, it will immediately move you away from pain. You may have heard a gunshot and thrown yourself to the ground, and you'll be lying there and you'll become consciously aware that you're now on the ground. When your nucleus accumbens, which is tucked away in the limbic system, and we'll get to all these systems more deeply in a minute, when it senses that there's something, it will immediately throw you into freeze, flight or fight mode. And this is called an amygdala hijack. So you can see that life is lived from the bottom up and not in a controlled sort of top-down fashion. And this is a key for you to remember as a coach, because your client is going to tell you stories, they're going to give you examples, and as you go along you've got to keep in mind that they may not be consciously aware of some of the decisions that their other systems are making. These three layers work together, but not in a controlled way. They are connected, but the human neocortex, that blue stuff at the top, is often not in charge. Each layer of the brain interacts heavily with the layers below. Those of you who watch the news may remember this scene from the Italian Parliament. The lizard layer acts and reacts more quickly than anything else because it's hardwired to the body. The monkey layer communicates directly with the body via the basal ganglia, and what's going on there is reflected in a very unfiltered way. These guys knew they were on television, they knew that they were in Parliament, they knew they should be behaving like an adult, and yet they didn't. As soon as a fight was on, they started throwing punches. The human layer can only give cognitive control over what's going on when it has gained control of the other two systems, and lizard and monkey brain have shut down or slowed down and given it control. So your brain operates a lot like the Italian Parliament. There's an active discussion, there's voting, and there's even a little bit of violence going on. But in the end, one team's going to win out. Is it lizard, monkey, or human brain? So it should be no surprise then that at times you know what the feeling is to be conflicted. You want to do this, but you don't do it. You feel highly motivated towards something, and then you let yourself down. You make a commitment on New Year's Eve, and you don't follow through. And it's often because the three systems are pushing for different things, and there's not coherence between the three systems. You haven't taken the vote. And hopefully by the end of this session you'll be much clearer with tools and practical ways to get one cohesive unit. The other thing is that these three layers act autonomously. They each have an opinion about the decisions and the things that are going on in front of you. So it can feel like being double or triple-minded. And again, think about those conversations I had with people when I pointed out their body language. Hey, you're crossing your legs, you're crossing your arms, you have a frown on your face. I don't think you agree with what that woman just said. And then they say, no, I absolutely do agree. I'm on the same page as her. I don't know what you're talking about. That's because those layers are in conflict with one another, and each layer has its own kind of motivation, its own compelling argument. So to get the most out of yourself and others, we need to go into all 7 layers of motivation. So let's start at the bottom. Let's go to the lizard brain, which I'm going to call motivation 1.0. This is the first layer to form in utero. It's the most primally connected part of your brain, and it's really biological. It's very body function. So here's a diagram for you outlining the lizard brain. It's called that because it closely resembles the structures and the brain equipment that reptiles carry. It's made up of the brainstem and all those other core structures that you can see labelled there, and these all lead up from the body into the head, and overlaid at the top, this diagram doesn't show the basal ganglia structures, but basically this equipment here governs your physiology. It governs motor control, action selection, immediate fear response, like throwing you to the ground when there's a gunshot. It has biological memory. It controls breathing and attraction related to mating. Many studies seem to indicate that this is also the seat of unconscious action. There's a piece at the back there which I'll highlight in blue later called the cerebellum, and some studies indicate that unconscious choices are made here. So if you think about trying to motivate a reptile, we're talking about basic biological brain hardwiring. So this piece of your equipment only understands one binary language. It will either move you toward pleasure or away from pain. So if you think about this lizard here, if the rock is getting too hot, that part of its brain system will say, go to the shade. If it sees a berry to eat, it will think, yeah, that's sweet, let's go and eat it. It's looking at the shadow on the ground and it says, oh my God, that's eagle-shaped, I'm going to run. So biological motivation is only binary. It moves you towards pleasure and away from pain, and it's very useful for biological issues like breaking addictions, changing bad habits, for example, quitting smoking or substance abuse, changing your sleeping patterns, drinking, eating. It's also very useful for getting immediate change that doesn't require memory. So biological or physical memory or somatic memory operates with very, very short-term or immediate changes. So I'll give you an example. People who are trying to lose weight often associate exercise with pain and fast food with pleasure. Fast food restaurants don't help, of course, because they add sugar and salt and additives. So if you think of Alicia Prague, this is the photo of her on The World's Biggest Loser, at the start of the show she loved McDonald's and she hated exercise. But 9 weeks later, by the end of the show, she's managed to get that thing switched around. By the end of the show, she's managed to view exercise as pleasurable and eating fast food as painful. So somehow exercising became good and fast food became bad, and that's entirely the opposite of what she had before. The show is programmed around daily choices, in fact around meal-by-meal choices, and exercise each day, and it runs, of course, like a competition, which we'll get to next. Okay, on the way through this presentation, I'm going to give you examples of failure-proofing each kind of motivation that I'm talking about. So how do you use pleasure and pain in an absolute failure-proof way, both for yourself and for your clients? All right, let's failure-proof pleasure. Lydia Zapita and David Deal from the University of Wisconsin-Madison did a whole range of studies into how people can use pleasure to motivate themselves. And what they found was pleasure-oriented goal motivation works better when you can see your goal, when you can actually see the improvements written down. So written goals are much more effective than goals that you just hold in your head. For example, what they found was people who use food diaries, either written or photographed, lost 3 times as much weight as those who didn't use food diaries. That's incredible. So you want to failure-proof pleasure, you want to write everything down, and photographing things is powerful. All right, so what about the fear of loss? So according to Dan Ariely from Duke University, who ran a basketball ticket experiment, we have to be paid twice as much to lose an item as we do for paying for it. In other words, human beings are highly loss averse. But what you have on your screen in front of you there is a website called stick.com, STICK.com, which was set up by Professor Dean Carlin from Yale University, economics. And what he decided to do was really support this finding by allowing you to put money up against your goals and be fined if you fail to do it. So one of my favorite examples off there is finding a friend when you smoke again. So you set up a system where you agree to reduce your smoking from one level to another day by day, and by the end of the time you're being accountable day by day, and then you give the money to your friend. And because human beings are so incredibly loss averse, this works really powerful. So if you want to failure-proof this biological level of motivation of failure, put some form of loss for your client in. Make them accountable in some way that's going to be painful. All right, so we're 23 minutes into the presentation, and I, Fiona, just want to make an opportunity here. If anyone had any questions yet, I'll just give you the opportunity to coordinate that, either written or spoken. And if there are none, I'm happy to keep going because there's plenty more to get along with.
Okay, and perhaps if anybody would like to ask a question, they could click on the hand icon on their control panel, and that will let me know that you have a question to ask.
And in the meantime, I'll carry on.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so the second layer is tucked around the top of the first system, and this is the monkey brain. We'll call it motivation 2.0. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is the pleasure, pain, reward, punishment systems all working together. It's called the monkey brain because mammals have the lizard brain plus the overlaying elements of the limbic system, which you can see highlighted here in yellow. The monkey brain governs things like memory, relationships, binding and attachment, nervous response, and it coordinates neurotransmitter flows that trigger emotions at a cellular level. Most neurologists believe that this is the layer that handles the subconscious mind, and it certainly has been found that this is the area that governs dreaming. And oddly enough, when things get mismatched here, this is where PTSD takes place when dream processing and memory processing gets switched around from the amygdala to the hypothalamus. So if we're going to talk about monkey motivation, let's think about motivating a mammal. Its basic emotional brain is wired to understand something slightly different from biology. It is programmed to look for reward and punishment. So if you think about the carrot and the stick analogy we use to talk about motivating donkeys or horses, basically we're trying to provide a reward for good behavior and a punishment for undesirable outcomes, so discipline and celebration. This motivation is only going to work if this part of your brain can predict the outcome. That is, if there's a cause and effect relationship. And it works like crazy if everything's measured carefully. So this part of your brain is tracking your environment to see if its actions are having an impact or an effect, which is one of the reasons that social media networks work so well, because if you put out a blog, you can see immediately how many people have looked at it, how many have read it, how many have reposted it. Social media like Twitter works like crazy because there's an immediate kind of cause and effect. I liked you and you liked me, I'm following you, you're following me, and we can see tangibly what the statistics are. This form of motivation is most useful for simple tasks that could be commensurately rewarded. So for example, if I work harder, you'll give me more money. If I speed faster, you'll fine me for going over the speed limit. And the limbic system is not really great at long-term things. So this part of your brain structure is great for short-term goals, immediate and short-term goals. Give you an example. So conscious tracking, as I said, when you track the results, it works like crazy. So if you can consciously track outcomes, then it will result in subconscious alterations in the limbic system, and it will change your decision-making processes. In the 4-Hour Body, author Tim Ferriss tells the story of a guy called Phil Libin, who was trying to lose 13 kilos in 6 months, but Phil didn't want to do anything. He didn't want to exercise, he didn't want to change his diet, he didn't want to do a thing. So here's Phil's chart. It's obviously in pounds, not kilos, because he's American. The blue line is a completely arbitrary target that Phil set up for himself. The red line is the maximum allowable weight on any given day, and the green line is the minimum allowable weight on any day. And again, these are just completely arbitrary. He just said 13 kilos, 6 months, ran a diagram in Excel, and that was that. Phil did nothing but measure himself every day at 9 o'clock in the morning. And he moved from, I'm sorry, I skipped to the next slide. He moved from his target weight from his peak weight to his target weight over 6 months without doing anything. So, amazing. Just measure it. So if you want a failure-proof reward and punishment, measurement equals motivation. The diagram that's now on your screen that I accidentally skipped forward to is from Jack Stack, who was the CEO and manager of Western Electric, and he coined the term the Hawthorne effect after productivity in their Hawthorne plant improved every time they changed something in the factory. That's crazy. The blue arrow represents, sorry, I can't get the blue arrow to go now. Let's give you that. The blue arrow represents the day that they changed lighting in the factory. The red arrow represents the day that they put new glass in the upstairs offices. The green arrow represents the day that they decreased the lighting in the factory. Now that's crazy. What they realised in the Hawthorn factory was that any kind of change made the workers feel that they were being observed. And what you'll notice there from that diagram is the line at the bottom represents fair workers, the workers who completed just around 85% of the run reports. Those three changes improved their motivation and improved their productivity the most. The next line up is people who were performing fairly, so they were running at about 95%, and you can see it had almost no effect on the 98 and 99% people. So it's fair to say that observation and measurement is not going to help highly motivated people very much, but it's going to have a huge impact on mildly motivated people, especially if you reward their changes. How do you failure-proof punishment? Well, one of the great keys to punishment is that you can make it a competition. You don't actually have to hurt or injure anybody. You just turn everything into a competition. So this limbic system part of our brain system loves comparison, and it hates the tangible risk of public failure. Again, to give you an example, on the Daily Burns website, and they've got 500,000 users, they show all the results of everybody logged in. And what they've found over 500,000 users is people who join peer challenges against their friends or against other people doing the same thing that they're doing lost 3 kilos more over the same time than people who just entered individually. The other thing I want to say about the limbic system is don't forget to celebrate. Monkey brain wants to be rewarded whether you succeeded at your goal or not. Monkey brain is saying, I tried, where's my banana? And this is one of the huge areas that we fail to do. So for example, with clients often I'll say we'll be on a weight loss challenge, or we'll be on how to stop smoking, or I want to go for that next job, or I want to get a job. And we'll set up the system, and I'll give you an example of that at the end of the talk. But often these people will forget to celebrate just the fact that they attempted to go after their goal. So they'll say things like, isn't losing weight a reward in itself? Or isn't getting a job a reward in itself? And the answer from a monkey brain point of view is absolutely not. Monkey brain wants to be rewarded for trying, and it wants to make everything a competition. So as soon as it's gone in the race and comes second, it still wants a banana. And so, yay, you got the job, don't forget to take yourself out for a meal. Okay, again, we're going to go for the third layer, and I'm going to just add the third part of the puzzle here next. But again, Fiona, just wanted to take an opportunity. If anyone's written down a question, so far so good.
We do have a question, Robert.
Engage.
Sorry,
Yep.
didn't mean to speak over the top of you then. Karen has a question for Robert, and Karen, I'm just unmuting you now. Please go ahead, Karen.
Oh yeah, sorry, I actually just typed it in, and it was with regards to the lizard brain, an example maybe just outside the weight loss domain of a painful loss.
Great question, Karen. Thank you. So we can set up a painful loss in any number of ways. From a monkey brain point of view, a punishment would be some kind of social punishment. From a pain point of view, anything that creates expense. So moving away from, say, weight loss, let's use smoking for an example. Often smokers are not considering the pain that they are enduring by their enjoyment. So they've never thought about the long-term costs, because remember, lizard brain is very immediate. So lizard brain doesn't like thinking about cancer, which is why cancer advertising against smoking often doesn't work. It's shock treatment, but it doesn't get to biological motivation. You can make things painful for lizard brain in a whole range of areas. So, for example, saving. I work with clients that find it very, very difficult to save money. So I might suggest to them to put a jar on the top of their telly. Of course, tellies are all flat screen now, so you can't do that. Put a jar on top of the fridge and put the money physically in the jar so that your lizard brain can see your improvement in savings. So put the money somewhere you can see it. But if you fail to meet your saving target, take the whole jar and give it to somebody you don't like, or give it to a charity you don't approve of. So set your world up so that it's very painful to lose the savings, that the goal that you're setting it up. So you have the pleasure, or the visual pleasure, of being able to see, yeah, I'm succeeding, and concurrently the pain of losing that money if you don't. I could give lots of other examples, and hopefully the example that I give at the end of one of the clients that I walk through will also help. Any others, Fiona?
No, that's all for the questions at this stage.
Great, okay. So the third layer is the overlay. You think about the crinkly grey matter that you're used to seeing in a lab jar. This is motivation 3.0. This is the neocortex, which governs rational thinking, planning, prediction, pattern recognition, processing the five senses, and also spirituality. This is where conscious thought and the experience of being me comes from. And there are well-documented differences between left and right hemispheres and between male and female brain thinking, but none of those differences impact motivation, except in the field of goal setting. So I'll give you a little bit more on goal setting in a minute. But try not to think or worry about left and right and male and female brains. The neocortex of all human beings works in roughly the same way when it comes to motivation. So the research of Daniel Pink, outlined in his book Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us, lays out the inner workings of motivation 3.0. The human brain structures respond best to autonomy, or self-direction, mastery, or self-improvement, and purpose, or transcendent reasons. Tasks which are complicated or which require people to work unsupervised are best motivated by the higher aspirations of improving ourselves, directing ourselves, and working for something bigger than ourselves. It's very, very useful for medium to long-term goal setting. So think lizard, immediate, monkey, short-term, and human brain, long to medium-term goals. I'll give you an example of this. How would you motivate people in the West who are basically already very well paid and who want to do less work for the money that you're already paying them? A lot of people have been experimenting with results-only workplaces, ROWE, and the companies that you can see there on the screen, including Zappos Shoes, Gore-Tex, Gap Clothing, and JetBlue, of course not the pilots but the support staff. In these workplaces, you can show up when you want, work from here or from home. You can do anything you like to get your work done. How you do it is up to you. You still have specific goals. You still have to complete a project by a certain time or ring up a particular number of sales. And autonomy is not the same thing as being independent or separated. They still have teams. There are still corporate objectives. It's just that if you work for one of these companies, or if you work for my company, we just trust you to be an adult. So you get to govern yourself. And I love that idea. So let's failure-proof those three elements. The first of them is self-improvement. So how do you make sure as a coach that you help your client improve themselves in a way that they're going to succeed at? What Nike Plus have discovered from 1.2 million people who are tracking their products is that once a person has uploaded something 5 times, they are twice as likely to continue tracking the change because they get addicted to the data about themselves. Now, again, sorry, this is a sporting example, and I've only just realised from your comment, Karen, that a lot of these are exercise and physically related, but hopefully you can see once a person does something 5 times, they become addicted to the change, but 5's a minimum number, okay? Find a way to repeat the habit, the time, the eating, the exercise, the personal growth and development, the confrontation strategies, the anxiety overrun strategies, the NLP, the anchoring. Get them to do it 5 times in a way that they can observe and repeat, and they're much more likely to grab a hold of that change and continue with it. How do you failure-proof self-direction? Well, you have to allow the client, of course, to direct their own course of action, and you know that's no surprise to us as coaches because that's what it's all about. They're the expert in their own life. But one of the ways to help a client really failure-proof self-direction is to find the smallest possible change they need to make, which is often called life hacking. What's the simplest hack they need to do to make their life easier? So a sporting example for you. A 70-year-old Queenslander called Roy Redman from Kick Builders promises to deliver perfect kicks in 6 weeks at professional AFL level. So 100% kick guarantee in 6 weeks flat. Now that's pretty hard to cope with. What Roy did was he reduced the one act of kicking a footy into 20 coachable actions, and then he drilled thousands of players over these 20 coachable actions, and he condensed it all into 6 one-hour training sessions to get people to kick a ball perfectly. One of the things Roy likes saying is, when you're in front of the ball, the kick is all that matters. Now, those of you that play golf or those of you that do bowling may have heard that kind of logic before, especially if you've got any coaching. It's the next hit that matters. It's not the audience, it's not the score, it's not how people feel about you. The thing that you're about to do is all that matters. And so if you want to help a person with self-direction, spend a bit of time with them working on how to find the quickest and easiest and simplest life hack. Okay, so how do we failure-proof transcendent purpose? Well, here's the trick. If you don't have one, get one. Figure out what the higher purpose of your client's desired action is. So often, companies and people have not answered the why question first. They have not figured out why it's important for them to confront their partner, or why it's important for them to quit their job, or why it's important for them to work shorter hours or quit smoking, or whatever the example is. So again, just operating out of the business environment, think about Wikipedia, Apache, or Skype. These are all free corporations. They're free to the users, and they're all manned by volunteers, highly technical experts who work for nothing. Why do they do it? Why does Wikipedia, which now has less errors in it than the Encyclopedia Britannica, why do those people work for nothing? It's because they understand the why. I had to do a little bit of research to find out what Skype's why was, but have a look at this. To be destructive in the cause of making the world a better place. That's Skype's catchphrase. That's their vision statement and plan. So what I love doing is helping clients answer the why question. Why is this important? Which is coaching 101. So we're on the home straight. We've got 3 or 4 minutes to go before we open it up for questions. So again, I'm not sure exactly why you showed up today. Procrastination, motivation, helping people deliver, motivating your sales team. Maybe you listen to Marvin Oka. Maybe you just want CCEs. So let's quickly review the 7 forms of motivation, and then I'll give you one example to really slate it home. There are 2 biological motivators, pleasure and pain, and we have to get those lined up for lizard brain to be happy. We have to get pleasure and pain running in the same direction as the desired outcome. So think about the people on World's Biggest Loser. They have to swap around their pleasure-pain association with exercise and eating. A lot of our clients have the pleasure-pain associations the wrong way round, and we need to help them with this piece. Then there are 2 emotional motivators, reward and punishment, for making the monkey brain happy. Again, these have to be coherent and running in the same direction as the person's desired change. And lastly, self-direction, self-improvement, and transcendent purpose. So we've got to be able to answer the why and see that the proposed changes will make them better and happier, and that they get to govern their own choices. So it's a killer in a coaching environment for you to set the outcomes for your client. Much more powerful for them to choose the outcomes that they're after. So here's a cohesive example of how I stack these 7 motivators for a client. I had a client, Roger, who exhibited procrastination. Now his procrastination was around a lot of different things: finding a job, fitness, going outdoors. Try as he might to live healthily, he seemed on this endless cycle of ups and downs. Now, we got into a bit of his biography and we found that he had suffered terribly in the UK. He'd been through post-traumatic stress disorder. He had low-level anxiety about open spaces and some high-level anxiety about one-on-one meetings like our coaching. So as we talked about the objectives that he wanted for our 6 sessions together, he ended up choosing just a couple of things. He wanted to go for a peaceful walk most weekdays. So 5 days a week he wanted to just take a walk and not experience anxiety. And the second thing is he wanted to get back into cooking, and particularly beautiful, healthy meals. So those are 2 fairly reachable objectives that we could work on. Now what you're going to notice in this example is I'm going to stack each layer twice. So I'm going to use reinforcement at each pleasure, pain and so forth level so that we have failure proofing going on. So the first thing we needed to do was talk to the lizard. Now Roger lives in Canberra and we needed to get the lizard to move towards those 2 goals. So the question is, how do we make walking a pleasure when at the moment he finds it a chore? Well, we pan around his life and we start asking questions, and I find out that he loves photography. So I suggested that he take his camera walking, and he took this beautiful shot of Parliament House. I also discovered that he loved riding, so on rainy days he could swap cycling for riding, which he liked riding in the rain, and he could swap that out twice a week. So he loves riding, he loves photography. We'll use both of those in the service of getting him outside. Remember, we're trying to overcome GAD, general anxiety disorder, for him as he goes outside. The second thing is we need to make pain be his servant to move him away from his issues. So again, I chose 2. We panned around his life and we wanted to get him walking and cycling for 5 days in a row, and I got him to put some money down against himself at stick.com. So I just introduced him to the website. I said, set yourself a goal. He chose, I'm going to go walking 3 days and cycling 2 days, a particular distance, and I'm going to put some money down against myself at stick.com. The second thing he decided to do, using photography again, was photograph every meal. And this had an odd way of making him really evaluate the pain of what he was producing to eat. It really made him stop and pause and consider and look at the healthiness of what he was eating. And it turned out he was really quite a good cook too. All right, so we have to talk to the monkey as well. So we need to bring in reward and punishment. Roger loves coffee, so we decided to get him to walk to his favourite cafe to have a cappuccino with a friend a couple of times a week. So after going to Gus's cafe, which you can see here in the photo, he would walk off to get fresh ingredients at the market, and then he would walk home again. We also asked a few questions around what else he liked to do in the afternoon, and it turned out he enjoyed a glass of red wine in the afternoon while he was watching the early news. So what we did was we said, you can't have that glass of red wine until you've cooked the meal. So you can't have it at 5 with the news unless you cook your meal early. Place the red wine that you love after the function of cooking and photographing the meal. We've also got to bring in some social punishment. So Roger used shame as a punishment. He made himself accountable to his best friend about the program. So it's a social, emotional, connected form of punishment. The idea of his friend's disappointment is enough for him to stay motivated, but he also got his friend to call him every Monday morning, and so he checked in on himself every Sunday night to make sure that he'd cleared the bar. We have to talk to the humans, so there's self-direction, self-improvement and transcendent purpose. So Roger set goals for himself, and he took rather much the same approach as Phil Livin. He recorded everything and demonstrated to himself that he could keep it up for 5 days. He placed a self-improvement goal before himself. He wanted to buy a snazzy new jacket. He's a bit of an artistic guy, so he wanted to buy a new sports coat for Christmas, and he went out and bought it in size M, and he was XL when we started. He wanted to wear that at Christmas, and he also started looking around at diets and chose to go on the Atkins diet and move away from carbs. Roger stuck to the regime. Now remember, his goal wasn't weight loss. His role was to go out and walk. And his role wasn't calorie counting, it was to cook beautiful meals. But one of the stunning side effects for Roger is that he stuck to his regime and he lost a kilo a week for 8 months. So that's 32 kilos. That's not the most impressive story I have. This is Natalie, a psychologist who lost 45 kilos in the same period, and you can see her testimony at one of the websites I'll put up in just a second. So a quick warning though, I work with a lot of companies, business owners and individual clients, and some rail and some fail. Motivation isn't a fix-all. The outcomes that you get are based on your willingness to change and your willingness to do the hard work. So some people train, wreck and blow up. That's because they actually don't make the 7 forms of motivation run together. So thanks for playing. That was 47 minutes of presentation. So I want to open it up now again, Fiona, for any questions that you may have about those 7 forms of motivation.
Wonderful, thanks Robert. So if you'd like to ask a question, please click the little hand icon on your control panel, and that will alert me to the fact that you've got a question to ask Robert. Okay, Judy, we have a question from you, and if I'm just going to unmute you now, if you'd like to go ahead, please.
Can you hear me before I go ahead?
We can.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I'm so motivated through what you presented to us today. My question is related to a current client who is very high up in her organisation, has an incredibly hard and strong work ethic, works incredibly long hours and is very proud of that and is coming out with amazing results. She did a 360-degree feedback report where her staff are feeling threatened by her very strong work ethic and feel they need to put in the same amount. She has said to me, I used to worry about that sort of thing, but that is their issue. Now, my question is setting goals with her, and in terms of what you've described with the 3 parts of our brain, I think there's a wonderful opportunity here. At the moment, there is a refusal to take on the impact her behaviour has on others. So I'm sitting here thinking, oh, there's something in here, but I haven't quite nailed it for myself in terms of how I negotiate the goal setting with her.
Okay, so could you restate that as a simple question for me?
How do I, she's got the awareness around the impact on her staff. How do I motivate her to engage in a goal that will have improved results for her whole staff? So
Beautiful.
There's not the motivation to change.
Okay, so my instinct is that this is a monkey brain problem. The reason for that is we're talking about social connection, we're talking about a team, mirror neurons, relationship and cohesion. So it feels to me like that's going to be a monkey brain issue, and her monkey brain has no reward for that change and no punishment for lacking that change. At the moment, her world is rewarding her for harder work. Okay, so her monkey brain needs to know, what do I get for backing it off? What are you going to give me for creating a better team environment? I don't understand what the payoff is here. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work with her around what that is, and also what's the social punishment if I don't change? I don't give a rip what my team think about my work ethic. So is there any consequence for lack of change? Does my boss care whether I change? Am I going to have high staff turnover? Am I losing people? Is that costing me money? So monkey brains are very unclear on these 2 social issues. Does that make sense?
It's wonderful. The first step with her, when even with myself, there is her organisation, it's a compliance coaching, there's 10 sessions and her organisation has requested it. So obviously I've got a fair bit of work to do to engage her. Just I don't want to take up too much time, but just briefly, what would be a starting point for me in this? So if I'm exploring the monkey brain, what might I do to start this process?
I'd grab the diagrams and I would show her the 3 layers of motivation and the 7 kinds, and then highlight back to her that she has no compelling reason socially to make these changes. If it's a compliance situation and you've been brought in to basically performance manage this client, then you have reason and she has leverage to make these changes. So, but I would just explain these levels of motivation to her.
I love that strategy.
Yeah.
And you use the diagrams with the clients that you work with, obviously. You
every time
from
the prison cell to the boardroom.
Right.
I don't go into nearly as much detail as I did with you because I'm trying to help give you enough background so you can feel confident to use it. I'll just give them the diagram and use those 3 layers and show them the 7 reasons. It takes about 5 minutes to just show people that. And as soon as they've seen it, they go, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's intuitive.
Yeah. Great. Thanks very much, Robert.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Judy. There are other questions, but we have hit the top of the hour. So just with respect to those people who need to leave the call, what I'm going to do is I'm about to give the second CCEU password, and then we will have another question from Holly if she's able to stay on the call. No, I believe she's actually lowered her hand. So we'll make the assumption there that she's... Oh no, it's back up. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording and we'll give the second CCE password, and then for those who are able to stay a little longer, Robert has very kindly said that he will stay after the call and answer questions for another 5-10 minutes. Okay, so just one moment.